In this video, we are going to be reviewing email configuration and general routing within Odoo. So the first place to start is configuring your mail servers. In order to do so, you will either need to be in debug mode, or you can go to your settings and search for mail, and you will see quick links to set up your incoming and outgoing email servers. This is also where you will set your alias domain. Be sure to set this and save your settings before moving on to your email server configuration. On your incoming email server, you will see the option to put in some details regarding your mail server. Of course, you can give it whatever name you would like, but the really important pieces are going to be this server type. This is going to depend on the email provider that you are using, the server name, so how will we connect to this mail service, the port, so the port will be set automatically to 993 by selecting SSL TLS, and then the username and password. So the important thing about incoming email is that the username or the inbox that you set up for your incoming mail servers must be configured as your catch-all. So when your mail server receives an email and the address that the email is to is not the email address of somebody in your organization or a direct match to an alias that you have set up within your mail platform, then functioning as the catch-all, this email address or inbox will funnel all emails that don't have a direct match to it, and thus they will flow into Odoo in some way, shape, or form. We will talk about the email routing itself here shortly. So once you have this all configured and set up, you can say test and confirm, and that will verify that Odoo was able to connect to this user at this mail server and thus should be capable of fetching incoming email. If we hop back, we can then go to our outgoing email servers. This is going to look very similar to incoming email. You give it a description. The SMTP server, so where it's going to connect, I have dash off here simply because it's a way of preventing outgoing mail. So I can just take that off and this will be active when I test my connection. The connection security, depending on what you select here, will change your SMTP port just like the SSL TLS on the incoming mail. That said, you may have a different port that you need to use or is preferred to use by your mail server. And then we have the username and password. Again, typically this can be the same username and password that you set up for your incoming mail that can function as both the incoming and outgoing mail user. And lastly, we have priority. So one of the important things to remember is that there are a few places in Odoo, such as in email marketing, where you can specify the mail server you want to send from. However, in all other places in Odoo where you're not specifying your mail server, then the priority comes into play, and a priority of 1 is going to mean that this is the email server that your mails are going out through. So the higher priority, the lower down the queue it is in terms of outgoing mail servers. And in general, your highest priority one should be your primary outgoing mail server. And then you may have some others that are lower priority that you choose to select in certain circumstances, such as during marketing campaigns. We're just going to set our SMTP port back to what I need it to be, save it, and test our connection. Now, I want to be very clear about something that is important when it comes to the outgoing mail. This mailbox and user that's set up as the outgoing mail server must be capable of sending as though it is anyone in your organization, which is also known as disabling strict from headers. So we'll see this come into play as we review email routing and outcomes. But it needs to be able to send as a user, for example, tom@example.com, without directly connecting to Tom's email account. So it sends as Tom without being Tom. This is how users can send emails back and forth to customers and have those emails appear to come from a user, which is more personal, rather than admin@example.com. It's also important to note that In this case, we will need to get into debug to see this. The prefix, in this case, our case, admin at, should never match what you have set as your system parameter, or in general shouldn't match what you have set as your system parameter for your mail catch-all alias. So this value right here, catch-all, is what you'll see if you manually inspect the reply to email address when you're sending emails back or in reply to emails you've received from Odoo, which we will see. The reason why it should not match what you have as your user kind of inbox for our incoming mail is because some email platforms, this will cause an error where you cannot directly email the catch-all email inbox. It has to be routed in there via other means, such as not being a direct match to something. So if you were to email, in our case, admin at Odoo Suites, then what you are going to get is a potential bounce back saying that you cannot email the catch-all email directly. So that's a roundabout way of just saying that you can change this. In many ways, I would just leave it catch-all, but you can change it. But it needs to not match any other aliases in your database, and it also needs to not be a direct match to the prefix on your incoming mail server user. Okay, so now that we've talked about that a little bit, let's talk about email routing in Odoo. So now that we are in debug, I can go to my incoming mail server. And we're going to see that we have a setting here that I configured for create a new record. So what this is the action to perform on an incoming mail if no other routing options can be found. So I'll talk through them briefly, and then we will actually show real life examples of each of these. So the first example of Odoo of incoming mail is going to be you have sent somebody an email through Odoo, and when they click reply, they reply and it gets fetched by the incoming mail server. That is going to be routed to the document that you sent the original email from. The second option is if it doesn't go directly to a record, it will try to match an alias to route it to a specific application or record type. So a good example of this is going to be in CRM. We can see in our configuration for sales teams that we can set an email alias. So if somebody were to email events@odosuites.ebu.me, then they're not emailing back from a specific record. They are going to email this, and a record within the event sales pipeline is what will be created. You see aliases in various places throughout Odoo, and you may not want to go and track down every potential place you could find an alias to see where it would route to, and that's perfectly fine because if you're in debug, you can search for aliases and you can see all the aliases that exist. So for example, if somebody emails jobs at, it's going to make an applicant within our Odoo database. This is also really helpful if you have a couple of different email addresses that you would like to route to a specific place, because Odoo only lets you set one email alias, for example, on events. Then we could simply take this, duplicate it, and say that if you email wedding help, that will also route into this specific sales team as a record. So in that way, you can technically have multiple aliases, even though you can't configure multiple aliases on the specific records like the sales teams or the help desk teams. And then the very last way that Odoo handles email is, as we saw in the incoming mail server, so if they're not replying to a specific record and they didn't email an alias, so it doesn't create a new record, then what it will do is it will try to perform this action that you have set here. The most common one is creating a new lead or opportunity because it doesn't require a lot of information, and it's very easy to follow up on those particular record types. It just needs the email and the subject line, etc. So there aren't a lot of required fields, which is what makes it an opportune new record type to create if email is not routed somewhere else within Odoo. All right, so let's look at an example of each of these in real time. So we are going to go to Contacts, and we'll click on a contact, and we can send a message directly to this contact over here. Okay. Now we see a white envelope. If you see a red envelope, it means that the email did not successfully send, and we will take a look at that shortly as well. Now, one thing we will note is that my outgoing mail server is admin@eboosuites.eboo.me. However, my email address is eboo-salesperson@eboosuites.eboo.me. So when we look at the resulting email, what we will see is that the email comes from eboo-salesperson@eboosuites.eboo.me. So this is what I meant by it sends as the user without being the user. It didn't have direct access to this email inbox, but with disable strict from headers, it could send as though it was, which is much more personal. So now if we reply to, you will see that it has a name that is relevant to the record. And if we click that, we will be replying to that catch-all parameter. So catch-all@eboosuites.eboo.me. That's obfuscated from the end user. They don't really see that unless they inspect the email address. Now over here, I'm just going to open a new tab. And the reason I'm going to open a new tab is I want to fetch my email quickly. Two things to note is that in scheduled actions, which you can only get to if you're in debug, you have a few mail related scheduled actions, but the ones that we are really talking about today are the incoming and outgoing mail servers. So fetching and sending email. These can be modified to run more often, but because of testing purposes, I don't want to wait 5 minutes for my email to come in. So I could go ahead and click on the scheduled action and run manually, but the second way to do this, which is what I'm going to show, is to go to the mail server and click Fetch Now. Now over here, we see that our chatter has updated, and when the customer replied to this email, it automatically routed to the particular record that the email was coming from. Now, who the email is coming from can be changed a bit based on the email template. So we will talk about that as well before we wrap up this video. But for now, we're talking about incoming mail routing. And we see that because we replied to an email that came from a record, it was routed back to the record. Now let's send an email to one of our aliases. I'm going to send an email to our support help desk team. Now I will fetch that email. And we can look at our tickets, and we will see that a new ticket was created from that email. So again, I didn't reply to an email that had been sent from Odoo, so it didn't get routed to a record, but I did send an email to one of our email aliases, and thus it knew that I wanted to create a specific type of record because of the email address I sent it to. Last on our list is sending to an unknown email address. So in this case, I'm going to send it to test123 because I know that's not a real email address. Then I will go ahead and fetch my mail. Now we can go into CRM, and look at our leads because we have leads enabled. And we will see that a new lead was created because I sent an email where the email address I was sending to was not a direct match and there was no relation to an existing record in Odoo. So it performed our action as we set it up on our incoming mail server. Now, I did say we'd look at email templates, and I do want to touch on that. So we have seen how the email that went out as our user's email address. But there is also a way on email templates to indicate that it should come from a different email address. Sale order is a good one to look at. So if we look in the email configuration, we will see that the email from is the user_ID on the record. In the case of a sale order, the user_ID is the salesperson that is set on the sale order if there is one. So if you were to send this email out on a sale order, which we will do, if a salesperson is set, it will be from their email address. And if a salesperson isn't set, then it will be from the email address of the user that is sending the email. One other thing to note is that auto delete is a pretty common configuration to have on email templates. This means that if the email sends successfully, it does not store a permanent record of it in your email queue. This is a good thing, as in general, you don't want to store thousands and thousands of email records long term. However, if you are troubleshooting something, you can edit the email template and deselect auto delete, so that way you can keep a record of those during troubleshooting and then come back to the email template and turn that back on at a later time. So let's do just what we talked about and go to a sale order. We'll actually do one for the same contact that we were looking at earlier. And we have a salesperson on this order, Ella, and she has ella@eboosuites.eboo.me as her email address. So let's send by email. And when we do so, we see that it is using that template we were just looking at. But as promised on the actual email that sends, because Ella is set as our salesperson, this email appears to come from Ella. And just like with everything else, if I were to reply to it, then we will see that when mail is fetched, the response goes back onto the record. Now, the last thing I want to touch on as it relates to email is that there are times when email may fail to send, and in those cases you will see a red envelope instead of a white envelope here. You'll also see a notification that the email didn't send. So if we click on this, then we will be jumped to the records where email may not have sent, and we see exactly that, this red email icon here. So we can click the icon and attempt to resend the email. Also note that if you have an email error and you don't want to attempt to resend it, we had the option to ignore failures. We can also click this checkbox next to the notification. We'll get this pop-up and you can say that you want to discard this delivery failure to get the notification out of your queue.